Hello, my friends. I'd like to talk to you about something that you're familiar with tonight. Certainly everybody that watches this kind of a forum would be familiar with it, I think, and it's called false flags. On the outside chance that there are some folks who are watching this who are not familiar with false flags, let me give you a little bit of background, or at least so you know what I'm thinking about here. False flags are the thing in geopolitics generally that where you generate a problem yourself and blame it on someone else for the purpose of a third kind of objective. And it'll become clear here what I'm talking about. False flags are a common option that have been used by governments for centuries. Essentially starting some problem, usually against your own people, some kind of an event, and then blaming it on someone else and using that as the basis to go after the other guy. The first one that I can think about right now was the sinking of the Maine. I think that was the Spanish-American War back in, what was that, 1890s or something like that. And, after the fact, it takes often, 20, 30, 40 years to finally figure out what really happened. But they found out that that was us that sank the Maine and used it as a pretext for going after the Spanish and saying that they did it, but we really did it. So we sank our own ship, killed our own sailors, all to be able to start a war with Spain. And then there are plenty of other examples. There's a variation on false flags, which is where you really don't have to start something yourself as much as take advantage of something that happened and twist it so that it can be used for your objectives. Back when Castro was first had taken over Cuba, there is now a declassified document that came from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, which is the most senior guy in the U.S. military, advocating that we do a false flag and kill a bunch of our people down in Florida, some kind of a, bomb or some other kind of thing, and blame it on the Cubans and use that as the basis for invading Cuba because they needed an excuse to invade Cuba. In Vietnam, of course, if you remember, there's this event that they blamed it all on about where there were a couple of ships, the Maddox and the Turner Joy, I think it was, two destroyers that were running around up in the Gulf of Tonkin off of Vietnam. And they said that these patrol boats came out shooting at them. And Lyndon Johnson used that as the basis for invading and starting the whole Vietnam War. Lyndon Johnson knew at the time that that was not true. He's quoted as saying, maybe there were whales out there or something, because they really didn't know for sure. And later on, I had a vice admiral friend of mine who also ended up being a vice presidential candidate, who told me that he was flying F-8s, which are Crusaders fighter jet, over the top of all this whole thing when that was going on. He said there wasn't anything there. They just were getting bad radar returns off of waves or some other kind of things, and they were shooting it at the sea or some other kind of thing. And yeah, but they took advantage of that, and in a sense, and it's a variation on this idea of a false flag. They didn't kill our people, but they certainly used it. Of course, the latest example of that is the excuse to go into Iraq, where they said there were all these weapons of mass destruction, and Colin Powell and others all said, we got these biological things or whatever. And that all turned out to be a big lie too. I've mentioned before that when I was in Vietnam, what we found out was that the rules of engagement there made it very clear that we couldn't win this war. They wouldn't let us win the war. The rules of engagement said you could not bomb any of the railroad tracks going to China or any trains or anything on the railroad tracks, because they were bringing all these supplies down from China. You couldn't bomb the port facilities at Haiphong because they were bringing in all these ships coming in there, and you might get one of the ships that were flagged. Maybe they're the UK. The example they used was that there were UK flagged ships, and you want to hit one of those. We can't do that. And they wouldn't let you bomb the rice fields, the dikes around the rice fields in Vietnam, because if you did that, of course, all the water would run out, and then they wouldn't get any rice, and they couldn't eat, and then the war would end. And so it was clear, and I could see that in very personal kind of terms, because I could see how my friends who are going out and flying missions and getting shot at and shot down were being sacrificed. We were pawns. It became very clear. I mean, this is not a new idea. It's been around all over and people say it all the time, but it becomes very personal when you're in the middle of the whole thing. There have been many other kind of events like this. You could certainly make a very interesting case that 9/11 was, in fact, a put-up job. That we killed a bunch of our own people using exotic weapons to bring down the buildings so that we could start this war that they needed to be started for whatever reason they were trying to start the war. Of course, and it's not a direct kind of false flag kind of thing, but it's a variation on it. That's what happens in this Ukrainian situation. They push Russia and push them and push them and push them and push them. And Russia stands up 7, 8, 9 times over as many years and says, do not do this, do not do this, do not come any further forward. And we just discount all of that and push them till they respond. And then we say, see, it was an unprovoked attack on the Ukrainians. So it wasn't unprovoked at all. We made it happen and then lied about it. And this Palestinian-Israeli event that's going on right now has all of this, for me at least, all of the indicators of being a similar kind of event. If you know anything about the military and anything about the Israelis, you'd be foolish to suggest that. I mean, literally just naive and foolish to suggest that they didn't know. They got surprised, and all of these guys came over the border, hundreds of them, and whatever. I've heard interviews with Israeli Defense Force members who used to be on the Gaza border. That was their job. And this woman said, it's absurd to think that these guys had come over the border and we wouldn't know. She said, a bird cannot fly across the border and we wouldn't know. She said, a cockroach can't go across that border and we wouldn't know. She said, it's absurd that what some people argue was this, one of the strongest and most sophisticated militaries in the world, and particularly the intelligence organization, was completely baffled by all of this. How in the world, with all of the penetration and the technology and everything they have, did they put 1,000 missiles or however many they are into there and they wouldn't know about it? I saw another report from an Israeli who said, I sat there and watched them. They opened the gates and just let them all come through the border. They didn't even have to climb over the top of any of the fences. Now, I don't know. People, it's hard to know for sure what's real here, but on balance, knowing a little bit about the military and the intelligence community and Israel and such, it's very, very hard to believe that this is not some sacrificial thing that Netanyahu is doing in order to justify taking care of the Palestinian problem that he has. Now, I'm not here to talk about justify, defend, or even comment anymore about what's going on over there. That's not my point to that. What influences and what impresses me about this is the easy way in which our leaders essentially sacrifice human beings with no care at all about lives and lives lost. You cannot, like I said, I sat there on the aircraft carrier in Vietnam and watched the message traffic where Henry Kissinger is making these decisions and watching my friends die because of the decisions he was making. And he clearly was not trying to win this war. He was just trying to keep the thing going. It became very clear to me toward the end of the war when Henry Kissinger was having an interview with some French journalist, a woman who played to his vanity, and the last question said something about, what about all these guys who are dying? And Henry Kissinger had this kind of throwaway comment that says, people always die in these kinds of situations. He had no concern at all about the lives and the individuals. This was a game. We were pawns in life, and any kind of he would not know what sanctity of life meant, and so on. And so we have seen this just over and over and over again. And to my way of thinking, it looks like Netanyahu is just doing the same thing in order to accomplish whatever his geopolitical kind of objectives, or just plain old political objectives are, to get rid of the Palestinians and the Palestinian problem. Now, how does that happen? Who are these people that end up in these leadership positions that are sociopaths or psychopaths or whatever they are, who have no sense of appreciation of human life, to where humans and great groups of humans are nothing, they're like bugs to be, they literally almost talk about them in those kinds of terms. To be just, they were meaningless. What has happened to them? What kind of people? How is it that you can get to the top of almost every government on this planet, and everyone at the top of these governments all have little to or no actual concern for the people they govern? And they're opportunists. They want to get to the position in order to take advantage of it for their benefit in some way. Different kind of reasons why, but they have been compromised along the way. I used to play around with pretty senior level in politics here in the Washington area for a number of years. And it's almost as though there were well-meaning people who started off wanting to be helpful to the people in their district, wherever they came from, their state. And somewhere along the line, they were almost every one of them systematically compromised. They may have been systematically compromised because of the very nature of the system that we live in, as it is, exemplified in politics. It's all about money, and how do you raise money so that you can get reelected? I mean, it's particularly acute in the Congress, where every 2 years they have to get reelected, and so they're constantly trying to raise money, and of course that opens you up to compromise any of a number of ways. And there are all other things, of course, that have been very active efforts to compromise someone, sexually or otherwise, taking pictures of them and threatening them, and therefore controlling them and being able to manipulate what they do. So they're compromised. And they've, it used to be that I could count on about 2 fingers. I remember Mark Hatfield, a senator from Oregon, who was a pretty kind of a straight shooter, and Gary Hart, who I knew fairly well, quite well, seemed to have a heart. Both of those guys came out of these relatively rather conservative Christian backgrounds, and so they retained some elements of kind of the compassion and other kind of things associated with, from Christianity. But there was certainly in Hart's case an active attempt to compromise him, which they successfully did, even though they may have made the whole thing up. That is to say, the pivotal event in Hart's case, and everybody remembers him sitting with a woman on his lap in front of a boat called Monkey Business. And what I have found out since then is that on his deathbed, George Bush's campaign manager, who was the Republican candidate, admitted that he had set that all up, and that Hart was going to go out on this boat from this guy down in New Orleans and go out for a day or two so he could work on it quietly and work on a speech that he was working on. And they got to the guy who owned the boat and gave him a whole bunch of money and told him to tell him that his boat was at a maintenance problem and he couldn't go, and so they could move Hart over to monkey business because of the imagery that generated. Lee Atwater was the guy who did that one. And Gary told me, he says, I was just sitting on a bollard on the pier. You know what a bollard is? Those big stand-up things that they tie the ships up with ropes to. I was sitting on the bollard, sitting there reading, kind of looking over this speech, and these two women came by, and they kind of took a look at me and walked down, and then they turned around and came back the other way, and this one ran over and jumped in my lap, and the other one took the picture. And it was just kind of like that. And Lee Atwater was the father of dirty tricks in politics and in the United States and American politics. So there's an active, really seriously active attempt to kind of compromise everyone. So when you get to the top of this system, then you don't care about the people. I mean, it's just kind of mind-boggling to me that what kind of a human being it is that has no kind of emotional attachment to a whole bunch of kids getting killed and all of the agony and everything that gets generated by that, and it becomes just passive stuff. Doesn't count. We had the chief of naval operations, a friend of ours, over for dinner one night, and he told us a story of that the Navy had just had a big bombing. If you remember, there was a destroyer or something, and some Yemenis, I can't remember who they were, but anyway, they did a suicide run in a little boat up against the ship and blew up a big hole in the side of the ship, and it killed, I don't know, half a dozen or a dozen sailors or something like that. And this admiral sat there and told us that he had to go to the kind of the funeral or the memorial service for these kids. And he says, I started to cry. And he said, I couldn't. And he said, and my aide came up to me and said, it's game time, Admiral. You got to stand up. This is it, And he got me recomposed again. And I really appreciated that about that, because here's the guy who's the senior man in the whole Navy who had this heart for the people and for these kids and these sailors and stuff. That doesn't exist. I don't know that it exists across the board now. I don't know anything about it at this level anymore, but I know that it doesn't exist in politics. And I don't know where that goes. I don't know what drives that. I mean, you can theorize about all kinds of other dimensional influences, archons and whatever, and maybe the intelligence community is out there compromising everybody, and they've got the NSA has got reports on everything you ever did, and everyone you ever called, and every girl you ever flirted with, and whatever. And the system has become very, very compromised at the top, and that then it seems to me is the good people of this planet recognize at some level that kind of stuff is going on. Certainly in this country, you look and you watch what the political leaders do. And there's, you know, you're not going to get up and try to bring down the government or anything because of what Joe Biden does, or even Trump. Directly. They're going to try all of the kind of other things, but we're kind of nice guys. But there is a place out here, not very far away, where guys like even Cliff High now is starting to talk in similar kind of terms to Martin Armstrong. It says a global civil war starts in a year and a half. And it runs through 2027. And there's this general giant uprising against the government. Why would that be? Because of things like this. Because they have lost. I mean, it's trite to say they've lost touch with the people, because it's a phrase that just everybody kind of knows. But this is really deep and fundamental. It's about the essence of who humans are and what kind of responsibility you have as a leader, and that you have abrogated all of your sense of obligation. And in the military, you cannot not care about your sailors or your Marines or your airmen or your soldiers. Certainly if you're a junior officer, the whole thing is about keeping them together and helping them and keep it an effective group together so that they can do what you need to do. And but that's lost on so many others, and particularly into this political area. And so it's just another thing, another element, and it's just really in my face, kind of in my face right now, watching how you set this all up, and you just have thousands and thousands of people that are going to die, and you play the whole narrative and generate, and you say that 911 or that this is their 911 or their Pearl Harbor, and you try to build all that imagery and that linkage and that narrative. It's just it's just another thing, it seems to me, that points to the fact that this is going to come increasingly unglued in the coming months. And it is going to be really quite important for all of us who are interested in building a new world out of all of this to start thinking in those kinds of terms and not get swept downstream and carried away by all of what's going on around us. So that's what I've been thinking about. So thank you very much.